It's a debut panel.
That's true.
Sometimes you need them.
Yes.
Sometimes you need them.
What do you got after this? Or do you have anything before the food panel?
I don't. I saw that there was Dylan's done. A lunch being thrown. Yeah.
Okay, I guess we're going to go ahead and get started because I don't want to cut it too short. And if Ronnie shows up, then he'll just join us. So, hello everyone. My name is Rebecca Roanhorse, and I am your moderator today. This is the panel. I don't even know what it's called. Debut authors. What happens next, or something like that. Am I correct? So, if that's not where you want to be, you should go somewhere else. And so. Oh, sorry, I'm getting text. And so we're here today with a number of debut authors, and I'll have them just introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. So we'll start down here.
Oh, I get to start first,
Yes.
huh? Okay. Hi, my name is Mike Chen. My book, Here and Now and Then, is a speculative time travel father-daughter story. Came out in January from Mira Books.
Hi, my name is Shepard. My debut novel, The Book of M, came out in June 2018, and it's about a mysterious phenomenon that is causing people's shadows to disappear all over the world.
I am Rebecca Roanhorse. I'm your moderator, but I am also a debut author, but not actually a debut author anymore because my second book came out like 3 weeks ago. So Trail of Lightning and Storm of Locusts. And it's about post-apocalyptic monster hunting on the Navajo Nation.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Quang. My debut, The Poppy War, came out last year, and I have a ton of these paperbacks, so I'm doing a giveaway of one at every panel, so if at any point you can guess who my favorite Avengers is, then this signed copy is yours.
Nice. Okay, so I think what I'd like to do is just, what we'll do is we'll have questions for probably about 45 minutes, and then we'll open it up to audience questions, so if you could hold your questions until then. And then Rebecca has to leave a little early, so we're just letting you know. So if you have questions for her, ask those at the beginning. So I guess what I want to start with, since this is about your debut books, I want to talk a little bit about your road to publication and how you sort of started out. So had you published anything before? When did you decide to write a novel? Was this your first novel, or do you have many novels in a hidden drawer somewhere that will never see the light of day?
Oh, everyone's
Mike,
looking
you
at
get
me.
to go first again.
So this book, this is the third manuscript that I sent agent queries to. The first one was this like new adult book that no one should ever read. It's terrible. But the second one was a really big learning step for me because it was the first time that I moved from creating like a story about families but putting it into a sci-fi landscape, and I really found that was my niche. So that second manuscript is where I felt like I really got a rhythm of what I wanted to write. And that one is actually had been revised, and that's going to be coming out in January 2020 as my second book. So this, after I signed with my agent for this one, we actually hit a bit of a road bump because we were getting a lot of feedback from presses where they said it's too literary to be sci-fi and too sci-fi to be literary. So we went to the acquisitions table with 5 different presses over a year and a half, and that was a very painful year and a half. And the common rejection was that it was in between genres, and I feel like that's shifting now as more books like mine, Pun, are becoming successful. But then the 5th one was Mira, which is the literary kind of commercial imprint of Harlequin, and they bought it, and everyone's really happy with it so far. So there was a 2-year, very, very painful gap of me going like, does anything happen yet? Do people like me? Do people hate me? And the feedback was actually constantly creatively people liked it, and it was the commercial people, like the business people, who weren't quite sure where it was going to slot in. So I'm really grateful for my editor for taking a chance on me, and I do feel like this genre is starting to get a foothold commercially.
Yeah, that I had a really similar process too, actually, where my agent went out to a bunch of different editors, and some of them were like super literary, and some were kind of in the middle, and then a bunch of the others were super genre. And yeah, it was really interesting because you'd get the literary people coming back and saying, like, there's too much magic in this, we don't really get it. And then the genre people were like, there's not enough magic in this, and we don't get it. So yeah, I think it is changing, and it was already changing when I was starting because I did end up finding a publisher. I'm with William Morrow, and that's been really wonderful because I think the book really is. It is really hard to say whether it's kind of literary or genre, and William Morrow does a lot of that same kind of on the line stuff. But what was my? So this was the first. I did finish one rough first draft of a novel that's now my drawer baby, and will probably never, it'll just live in the drawer. But this was the first. This is the first manuscript that I ever finished and then revised. And but I was also the kid and the adult who was really passionate about writing, and I would like start a new novel every month because I would write like 40,000 words, and then it would be going nowhere, and I would throw it away and I would start again. And I was so frustrated. That was like my personal struggle to figure out how to stick with something. And so this was the first one. I tried really hard to stick with it, but it also felt like right, if that makes sense. Like sometimes, even when it was so bad and so rough, I still was like, but I think this is the one that's going to make it.
So, I think that's a common problem. I think a lot of people start and stop stuff, and usually right around the 30, 40,000 word mark for some reason. That's what kind of craps out. So, like, what do you think? You said it felt right, but how did you push yourself through that? Were there any tips or tricks or things that made this one different?
I think, well, I tried to, I had that kernel of confidence about it, and I really tried hard to hang on to it, but the way that I tried to get there, because the other 99% of the time I was still terrified, was I just wrote it as fast as I could, because I thought if I can at least get to the end, I'll have a thing that I can fix. But if I never get there, then it's just going to be the same thing with every other thing I've ever started and never finished, so I have to finish quickly.
Rebecca?
I had a really different journey to publication. So I had never actually particularly wanted to be a writer. I just kind of enjoyed reading. And the first novel and only novel I wrote before I finished The Poppy War was this book called Liberty or Death, written when I was 10 years old for a school assignment about Patrick Dawson, a Revolutionary War hero who kills 500 British soldiers as revenge for his friend who died during the Boston Massacre. And it has a really cringy scene where he goes on a date with this girl named Hannah, and she's like, "Do you want beer?" And he's like, "No, I never drink on dates." And I thought that was cool, but drinking on dates is what you're supposed to do. But then after my sophomore year of college, I took a gap year to work in Beijing for a year because I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. I just knew that I didn't want to be an economics major anymore. So then something astonishing happened in Beijing where I was working a 9 to 5 for the first time, which meant that after 5 o'clock I had no homework to do, which was astonishing to me that I suddenly had all this free time on my hands. And then I saw an ad for Scrivener, and I was like, this looks cool. And then I downloaded it, and I was like, oh, novel writers use Scrivener. What if I used my free time to write a novel? Because that seemed like the easiest project to do, because the other alternative was learning to code during my free time, which I tried first, but it was really hard. So I was in contact a lot with my grandparents, pretty much, I think, for the first time of my adult life then, because I was living in Beijing, and I didn't see them very much because they were always in China, and I was hearing all of these stories about their experiences during World War II. So that was in my headspace, so I thought, okay, I'll write about that. So then 1,000 words turned into 10,000 words, turned into 100,000 words, turned into way too many words for a debut. And then when it was finished, I was like, I have a book, maybe I'll try to sell it. And it sold, and that was very surprising. And then I guess now I'm under contract for a trilogy. So I fell into a career as a writer. I didn't have a genre issue because it's pretty much just straight up epic fantasy as you can get. But I think I lucked into discovering writing as a passion. So I'm really glad I took that year off just to explore and discover. And I know a lot of people don't have the privilege to do that. So it's nice realizing that you can discover a dream later in life, even though 22 is not that late in life.
So I want to know, Rebecca, what was it like when you saw your name on a book, when you got the ARC or the first hard copy of this? What went through your mind?
Obviously, it was a lot. I think we all get that sense of thrill. But it actually wasn't as big of a deal for me as it was for my parents, because I'd seen the cover art, I'd been working with my editor. I knew at some point this is going to exist in a physical fashion. And because I was born in an age where I don't remember life without a laptop, the digital physical distinction isn't really real for me. Things are real regardless. But then I mailed it to my parents, and they were so excited, because there aren't a lot of Quangs in the US, so it's there are a lot of other Chinese names where kids named Zhang or Li can be yeah, Li, that's me. But it was the first time they had seen the last name Quang printed on a real thing in the United States, and that was really thrilling for them. And I just felt so proud that I could make my parents that happy.
Awesome. And what about you guys? What was it like to see your name on a book, and how did your friends and family react?
You go first.
I think I might also be a little bit the same as you. For me, it was more because you do, as the author, you see the cover a couple months or weeks before you actually get the advanced reader copy or the published copy. But for me, it was when I got the first, first pass of notes, which is where you get the whole manuscript and you've got to do edits on it. But it's the first time that it's formatted so it's still on 8.5 by 11 paper, but the text inside looks like the text in the book. It's not double spaced anymore. And that was when I was I did this, because it's 150,000 words, so it's a really big. So I was carrying my baby around the house, so that, that was the moment for me that it was oh, I really this is gonna happen, and that was because that's kind of all you. It gets more complicated, obviously, the closer you get to launch, because then you start panicking about marketing or panicking about sale. But it was the last magical, pure moment of because all you want when you start is to just have your book. You don't even care if you sell one; you just want to have it. And that was that moment where I was I have my book.
So I remember my editor had said, we're going to be sending you a box of ARCs soon. And soon was very vague. So I didn't know that soon
5
meant
years.
This weekend. Yeah, because in publishing, everything is super slow. So they say soon, I'm expecting 2 months from now. So I remember when the box actually arrived, it was a Saturday night. I went, my daughter, who's really young, is still kind of a jerk. She was around 4 years old at the time. And so she was being difficult, and I had to go pick up dinner because we just weren't able to cook dinner. And I step outside of the porch, and this box comes from HarperCollins. And then I yell back to my wife. I'm holy crap! I think it's here. But I had to go pick up dinner, so I didn't open it yet. And then we come back, and my daughter was just being fussy the whole time. And so when she finally went down. It was 9 o'clock at night or something, and then I was able to actually open it and breathe and think wow, this is real. Holding it physically, it was very weird, and I think that's the thing that I keep saying to people when they ask about how's it going, non-writer friends who are how's the writing stuff going, and I just keep saying it's very weird. It's this weird displacement of your normal life and all these dreams that you had. And they keep clashing in this very strange nexus. So it was thrilling and strange at the same time when I was actually able to sit down and comprehend it.
So I want to know what were the best and the worst moments about your debut year, because we're all pretty much through the first year. So I have to agree. I think the most exciting part is you sell your book, and then you get your book, and then the real world starts to collide with your book, and marketing comes into play. You start getting critiques, everything suddenly becomes really real, and you're not in your little no pun intended fantasy world anymore. So tell me a little bit about the best and the worst parts of debut year, and what most surprised you, and maybe what would you change if you could do it again?
I think the best part of it, and this is going to sound really cheesy, but the best part of it is actually the really cool writers that I've met. And it's we just on writer Twitter, which is how I met you. And then like the debut groups that I'm in, it's like we're all kind of going through the same thing at the same time, and it's all very strange. Like the real world doesn't quite prepare you for like birthing your creative baby and like ushering it into the world, and like you're very naked out there because this is a thing that you've worked on for years. And so having that support, and everyone that I've talked to is like, really cool, and I consider them friends now, and seeing them here is really great. And I say that's probably like the best part. That's actually, I mean, it's really cheesy. They're like, that's better than having my book out. Is the people that I've met. But I know I would really say that like, I feel like, I'm really glad that I've met these really kick-ass people because of it. In addition to seeing my book, on bookshelves, that's really cool too. And like the weirdest part is probably dealing with like my friends and family who like don't read, and like they don't quite get it, but they feel obligated to say something or buy it. And I keep telling them like, you do not have to buy it because you know me. You don't have to read it because you know me. And it's like led to many awkward interactions with my parents in particular. Which if you follow me on Twitter, then you've seen the story of my dad's reaction to my book. So.
I thought that was such a cute. It's a cute story. You should look it up. It's very funny. I think I would say, so I don't think it's the worst part, but it's definitely been the most difficult part for me, or the part that I should have expected but didn't expect, is after the book comes out, how much time you spend kind of not writing anymore. Mm-hmm. You spend so much time talking about the book to like, other writers at cons, or like in interviews or podcasts, or you go to events and or like signing books, and it's all really wonderful, but it's such a different kind of skill set, which and I'm like a super introvert. I would probably never ever leave my house ever if that was possible. So that was like a really big adjustment for me, and I used to, like, I was so nervous in the beginning that I would write out. I would do only phone interviews at first, because that way I could have like 5 single-space pages of responses, and I could literally just read them, because I was so and it's really hard to talk about your own book at first, because you wrote it, but you don't even know what it's about. It's really like, you really don't. Yeah. So that, and I think I'm still adjusting, because I'm still doing interviews for this book, but I'm now trying to write a second book, and that is also really hard, because you end up still thinking a lot about this story, but I'm supposed to be focusing on the other story. But I would say the best thing is that I have a favorite book in the whole world, and everybody has a favorite book in the whole world. And then you have writing teachers who say, someday your book will be someone's favorite book. And I was like, yeah, but like not really. Like, no, it's like, it's not, like somebody will like my book, but it's not going to be somebody's favorite. And I have had a few people tell me that it is their favorite book in the world, and that, like, because I know how much I love my favorite book, and that was really like, I couldn't believe that somebody would like say that to me. So that, yeah.
Cool.
I want to hear your highlights.
Yeah. I think mine have been sort of like fans who write me. So the thing for me is representation, right? Like my whole sort of motivation in writing the book was to give Native representation in speculative fiction, particularly in urban fantasy, because I love urban fantasy, and there are lots of stories with people or characters that are part Native, but they're not actually Native, and they don't live in a Native world, or any of the stuff that I know. So that's what motivated me to write the book. And keeping my sanity, because I was taking care of a baby and working full time, and everything was awful. So I wrote a book.
Wait, so you added a book to me?
Yes, kind of like Rebecca. It's like, I guess I'll write a book now. But I get fan mail, and I hear stuff like the details, like the sneakers that are taped on the side, or the food that they eat, or the things that they say, or the humor. I've never seen that in a book before, and that's my life. From like Native fans, and I can't, express to you how exciting it is to hear, that I got that right, and that it means something to these people. Like a girl was like crying because she'd never seen herself in a book before, like a genre book. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that was definitely the highlight for me too, like getting fan mail from young like Asian girls especially who are like, I've never been able to find a book about somebody that looked like me in the library, and I picked your book up at Barnes & Noble and now I want to be a writer too. And that's like so cool knowing that like maybe your book set somebody else on a creative path, because there's so many authors that I read during that gap year who did the same for me. And that's the other highlight. Like once you have a book out, you suddenly get to be on panels with a lot more famous people. And so I've gotten to meet like some of my heroes over the last year. Like at Denver Comic Con, I was just like, I sat down and I hadn't looked at who the other panelists were, and Christopher Paolini sat down next to me, and I just spent the whole panel being like, but like also like authors like you who I read recently, and like we get to meet in person at these panels, and that's just so cool being part of that community. So yeah, like that wasn't something I had anticipated becoming part of my life going into publishing, and that has been the best part of publishing. I guess for my low, like the same as Peng, like the amount of writing that you have to do that is not creative writing, like interviews and blog posts, and like it sounds like I know, ungrateful to complain about that, but it is very draining. And also, like, if you ever do an interview with an author, the worst question you can ask them is, what is your inspiration? Because that is such a vague question, and the answer is, like, my entire life and, like, the, you know, like, the compilation of all of my experiences and books I read and things I've thought about. So, and, like, having to answer questions like that, like, 12 times is very annoying. But, like, we get to do it, so not a real complaint.
So everybody sort of mentioned a second book in the works. So this is like we're mostly professional folks, I think. So I want to know, to your comfort level, what your contract looked like. Did you sign a 1-book deal, a 2-book deal? How did that go? And if you did sign a 2-book deal, are you writing another one? Have you finished it? What's it like to try to write this dreaded second book? And who wants to start? Yeah, we'll start.
Okay. This is great because I think we all have different situations. So my, we sold this book on a 1-book contract because it's not part of a series, and my agent said we could try to, push them to sign you for some second idea at this moment, but if you, it's the first book you're ever publishing, so if it turns out this fit was not great for you, maybe you don't want to have a second book locked in with this editor and this publishing house until you know that. And I thought that was very smart. So we just signed for the 1 book, and I ended up loving my editor and the publishing house. So I mean, they're amazing. And so about 1 month after this one came out, and it had a really good first month, and it was doing really well. And my agent said, let's capitalize on that because everybody at the publishing house is very happy right now. So you might, and so I wrote basically a 1-page pitch, kind of like what you would read on the back of the book. It definitely was not an outline. It was just kind of this is my cool idea. What do you think? And they so that essentially was the option. So I sold the pitch, and it kind of fulfilled the option part of the contract. And that's also for a 1-book deal because I don't think that's a series either. So I'm now under contract for a second standalone book.
And how's the writing going?
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's also just a difficult idea for me to write. It's set in the world ends in this book, and then lots of magic happens, so I could kind of just do whatever I wanted. And I found that it was a lot of world building work, but it was very easy because I could make everything up. And this next one is set in New York City, and things are real, even though there's magic, and it's just it's a mess. I don't know. It's halfway done.
Mike.
Me next. Okay. So when I was on my 2 years on submission journey, my agent had pulled my previous manuscript out, and he just said he wanted to see it. And then he turned out really liking it, but he said, we're going to have to do some heavy revisions, but I like the core of this. So we were working on that to actually go on general submission if Here and Now and Then didn't actually sell. So it came, by the time this sold, Mira gave me a 2-book contract. And they had tentatively scheduled the second book for 1 year apart. So this is January 2019, and then Unnamed Book 2 would be January 2020, which is, if I had nothing, that would be really, really freaking frightening. So, but fortunately, my agent really liked this second book, and so I think in April 2019, basically after we finished everything with this and it was going into production, I sent my editor the second book, and she really liked it. Thank God, because I had nothing prepared, and my agent was telling me that, like, you know, if they turn it down, it's okay. You can ask for an extension. You know, like book publishing, like, give you these dates, but they're very flexible. But fortunately, so they liked it, and we've gone through revisions, and it is done. I'm actually doing we're doing cover stuff right now. I turned in my final copy. And I've been with these characters longer, probably since like 2011, than I have with these characters. So for me to actually see them come to life is like, I didn't get very like feels like when this was, I mean, I did, but like not to the same level. Like when my editor said, okay, we're done with this second book, it was like, it was a much more longer arc. It felt like a longer battle. So like that was very, very gratifying. So that comes out in January 2020. It's called A Beginning at the End. And after that, I am not under contract and back on general submission. Yeah.
And Rebecca, I know you said you have a trilogy.
Yeah, so when we sold the Poppy War, it was sold as part of a 3-book deal, which has been good and bad. The good parts are that I've ended up really enjoying working with everybody at Harper Voyager, so I'm like happy to be at that publishing house. And I also had a very clear idea of how the trilogy should end. Like, I wanted to write the 3rd book before I wrote the 1st book. Like, I thought the 1st book was like boring, like setup material for the story I wanted to tell. So it's nice, like, being like guaranteed that you get to tell the whole story. The downsides have been that I don't think that when you're a debut author and you're signing your first ever contract and you're just really excited, like, you don't think about what it means to have a deadline for 2 more books, especially since second book syndrome is so bad and I suffered from it so hard. It was like having to learn how to write all over again, because like the first book had really like taken, like, I wrote it in 3 months, but really it had taken like 10 years, because, you know, that's the culmination of all like the thoughts about writing that I had. And then suddenly I had to like come up with a whole new plot from scratch and like write something that was like 20,000 words longer, and it was just very, very difficult. I also think that the deadlines were very ambitious, and I was about to start grad school, and I'm now like a grad student at Cambridge, like full time, and also writing full time. And it's just like impossible to balance everything. So we've had to extend the deadlines quite a few times. So I will have to go before we get to the part about like what would our piece of advice be. But my advice would be, there's like a lot of pressure within the publishing world to sign multi-book contracts, which can be really good for the author. But I think there's also a lot of pressure to sign them with really quick deadlines that are not feasible. So think very carefully about whether you can get that second book in on time before you sign for a multi-book contract, especially for your first deal, because like if you mess that up and disappoint the publishing house, then like that's not great for the rest of your career. So I wish I had thought more carefully about that before I signed for 3.
Oh, that's really good. And I'll just say mine. I signed a 2-book deal, and my editor had the wisdom to have me write the second book before the first book even came out. So Storm of Locusts was done and sort of in the hopper before Trail of Lightning was even published. And because your world totally changes, like, because you've been in your little bubble and you're writing your debut novel and everything is great, and then all of a sudden the onslaught of like the publicity and the critiques, and everybody has an opinion, and it's all coming at you, and you're like, oh my God. And it's overwhelming. It's absolutely overwhelming. And so I was glad the second book was done, because one of the things I think, good criticism or bad criticism, people can love your book and say, I loved this part of your book, and then you're like, oh, well, let me put more of that in. Or they're like, oh, I hated this part, and you're like, oh, well, let me take that out. You know, so it's sort of like this, the feedback is just, you know, it's sort of tremendous. And so it's good if you can write as long as you can in a bubble and stay off social media, because it can be the devil. And yeah, that's sort of my situation. And then I signed another 3-book deal, so there'll be 2 more of these, and I have a new series too, and so and I have 2 more contracts. So yeah, it's huge. And Star Wars. Yay! Thank you. For those that don't know, I'm writing a Star War. I'm writing the bridge between The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, and that'll be out in November.
I am so excited for that.
Okay, so let's see. Well, we are sort of at that point, I guess, where we'll talk about, let's see, what's next for you. If it's not the second book, if you have anything else that's in the hopper, like I just talked about, or your single piece of advice to other debut authors. Do we have folks who are headed on the debut track in the next year?
Nice.
Okay, if
Hang
you,
on tight.
congratulations.
Yeah, congrats.
Put your armor on. Yeah, so maybe a little bit about that.
Wait, so
About-
the
Oh,
device?
yeah, what your piece of advice is to other debut authors.
I would say, like, so join a debut group or find a community because this journey is really weird, especially if you're in like truly traditional publishing, like hybrid publishing and indie publishing is a little bit different in terms of marketing and publicity. So if you're in traditional publishing, like the milestones are different, and like there's like it feels like sometimes there's a lack of communication between like the publishing side. It's like this black box where they just spit out marketing ideas or covers or things at you. So it's really good to have a community going through it at the same time, and everyone can say like, okay, I just got this. Is this normal? Should I push back on it? Do I have the power to push back? So that community is like really, really important. I would say like find people who are like a little before you and a little after you, like, and that way like everyone kind of is like this mutual support group for each other.
This is like a very small piece of advice, but it really helps me. If you are like me and you did not do and are not comfortable with public speaking, what I started doing was every time I had a written interview, I would copy paste the answers and the questions to like questions that I thought were going to come up again into a Word document, and then now, so I don't like read it verbatim anymore because I think it would like start to get really obvious by now. But a lot of times, right before I'm about to have an interview or I'm about to go do an event, I will just open the document up and just read it through one time because it just like refreshes everything I want to say about my book in the best way, and it calms me down. And especially because sometimes you'll do like, I mean, right when the books come out, if it's getting a lot of traction, you'll have like 2 interviews a day, and then you're not even thinking about it anymore because everything is just, but then it'll be like a couple weeks and suddenly you'll get one and you're like, I don't remember what clever thing I used to want to say about, or, you know. Yeah. And so I just will open that document and like read it again, and then I feel like good to go. So that is, it's a very small trick, but it's something that helped me a lot until I got more comfortable with talking about the book on the fly.
Okay, and I guess we will open it up to some questions, and then we'll circle back around if we have time. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you were talking about the 2 shorter time between books and a 3-book contract or a multiple contract. What is I mean, obviously it's going to depend on your life, but what is too short a time between books?
So mine was a year between books, which was impossible. Like, I missed all of those deadlines, and we had to revise the contract multiple times. It totally depends on, like, if you can write full-time, if you have, like, a full-time job, etc. But for me, 1 year was way too short.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question.
So I was a journalist before this came out, so I already had somewhat of a public persona, but in like a totally different sphere because I was a sports writer. Yeah, if you look at like NHL coverage between like 2005 and like 2012, like I'm all over it. One of my friends told me, he's like, I just realized you seamlessly transitioned from my hockey Twitter to my nerd Twitter in like the past 3 years. It's amazing. Like I didn't even realize it. But but I did, like, for privacy purposes, like, so this is my real name, but like as I gained more presence on social media, like I try to be very private about like my daughter, Like if I do post a picture with her in it, like I always crop out her face, like that sort of stuff. So like my personal Facebook is like, you know, totally open to friends and family, but like anything like my Instagram, my Twitter, I try to maintain privacy on that. And I thought about pseudonym, but then because I already had an established platform, I just kept this. And there are a lot of Mike Chens in the world. So there's Mike Chen, the YouTube chef. There's Mike Chen, my old dentist. There's Mike Chen, seriously, in San Jose, like Mike Chen, my old dentist. And then Mike Chen, the minor league hockey player. So it's like sometimes we get tagged as each other. But yeah, it's. I think it depends on like what level of privacy you definitely want.
Yeah, this is also my real name, and I don't know. I think I guess there are definitely some reasons that you might want to use a pen name. Maybe if you're writing cross genres, or you need to switch genres, or your publisher asks you to. But I didn't want to, just because I felt like I'm going to spend all this time writing these books, and I want people to be able to find the real me if they're looking for that. And yeah, I mean, yeah.
So I am a lawyer, or I was a lawyer, now I'm a writer. But because I practice law under my maiden name, and this is my married name. Mm-hmm. So, and I needed that separation because I don't think that the bar would, especially the federal bar, would think this was cool. That's right. In a lot of ways. But anyway.
Yeah, there are quite a few reasons why I went with the initials instead of Rebecca, but right now the biggest one is that I also intend to have a career in academia, and I want when people to search my publications for academic work and for translations, which I also want to have a career in. I want that to be under Rebecca Quang, and then RF Quang for the fiction stuff. Sort of how V.E. Schwab does Victoria Schwab, V.E. Schwab, and one other name I think for MG, YA, and adult novels, and I think that's pretty smart.
Cool. Yes.
Rebecca mentioned that she's about to do a Star Wars novel, I think.
Mm-hmm.
For the rest of you, if you were offered a chance to do a Star Wars novel or some other media-related work, would you take that opportunity, or do you want to continue working on your own stuff?
So IP, would you want to do IP work?
Yeah.
So I'm going to take this because I publicly pleading on Twitter to write Star Wars stuff. So I was I'm wearing a Doctor Who shirt, and I would think actually writing Doctor Who would be really difficult, even though I wrote a time travel novel. But a Next Generation, Star Trek: The Next Generation era novel, or a Star Wars novel, please, universe, give this to me.
I think I would be hesitant. I mean, especially about Star Wars or Star Trek, just because I enjoy them, but I don't know enough, I think, to feel like I could do a book justice. So maybe if it was a franchise that I was just so obsessed with and knew inside out. But I've never tried to do that before, and I would worry that it's a different skill, definitely writing within someone else's world versus a world that you're making up, and you can change however you need to at whim. So.
I just want to add that pleading on Twitter works. That is pretty much how I got the job. Yeah. So yeah, I wrote a really long Twitter thread that I kept reposting and reposting.
Oh, that's the trick.
Please let me write Star Wars. I was like, natives love Star Wars, and then I wrote all this, all the native influences in Star Wars and how they use the Navajo language, in Jabba's palace, and all of this stuff, and people noticed. So yay.
Yeah, I would love to do a Rose Tico novel, so maybe we
Yes.
should start tweeting about that. I have to go because my friend is currently doing her first ever panel, and I want to be there for it. I'll leave this book and the answer with Rebecca.
Ooh.
My favorite Avenger, if you can get the answer at some point during the panel, come up and get this book. Thanks, this was an awesome panel.
Yeah. Thank you, Rebecca.
I have a tangential question for you on the. I've heard that IP for major properties is a really ridiculous turnaround time. Is that true?
Yes, I have 4 months to write that novel.
Oh.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll throw that in. So Trail of Lightning, I had my entire life basically, but I wrote it in about 2 years of writing and a year of editing before I subbed it. And Storm of Locusts I had to write in 9 months, which I thought was like pretty crazy. But yes, Star Wars I have 4 months. So it just gets shorter and shorter. But luckily, I think you become a better and better writer. Or, you start to understand structure more. Like, and I will agree, one of the critiques of Trail is that it's sort of wobbly, like it's not this clean through like plot. But that's fine because I write character-driven books. But this one is really straight through. The plot is very clear. And it's because I became a better writer. It's because I understood more what I was doing, and the first book was sort of like a meander. So, yeah. Oh, I'm the moderator. I'm so prepared. So, does anyone else have any questions? Sure.
Yeah.
Oh. No. I'm currently going through it right now. And I think what is the hardest part about it for me, and it's ridiculous because like logically I know this, that when I look back, so I'm about halfway through the first draft of my second book, and it's just like a mess. Like it's on fire, falling off a cliff. Like it's a mess. But that's totally normal, right? Because it's your first draft. And this book was just like that. This book was like, and so logically I know this, that the first draft is always this bad and it's fine. But because you spend so much time of your debut, I think especially your debut, right at the very end where everything's very polished and like fitting together really well and, it's so like complete that's kind of like the last frame of that was like your last normal. So this doesn't feel normal anymore, which it should. It feels wrong. And like I know this, but I still sit down every day and panic at the mess that's on the and then it's hard because somebody tweets at you like, I love the Book of M so much, it's so amazing, and so you're like, okay, so that is normal, that is how it's supposed to be, and why is this not working? So yeah.
I would say because I'm so with my book 2 being like technically done, and we're starting like the cover and blurbs and things like that, I'm just kind of hitting like that panic moment of like, okay, this thing I thought I knew what to expect, and like on paper I do, but then like we started asking for blurbs, and I got my cover draft, and it just hit me that like, oh God, like once we get the arcs done, like then they're going to start submitting it to like Book List and Publishers Weekly and like the other reviews, and then it's just the, what if everyone hates it? and so it's like, it's just kind of like a lot of internal panic. And I think logically, like for me, I always felt like the second book is a very logical extension of where I'm going with this, because it's like, it's a little bit more structurally complex. There's more characters. Thematically, it hits a lot of the same things. So it makes sense. Like I would think people would like it, but what if they all fucking hate it? So I think that every day.
So I want to actually ask about your cover. What was the process of, did you have any input into your cover? Because lots of people think that debut authors get to choose their covers, and that's just not true. But did you have any input into your cover? What did you think? Are you happy with it? What was the process like?
I don't think I'm ever going to get another cover as good as this. This cover it's amazing, and like other people tell me like they really love it, and I really love it too. When I first got the draft of it, the concept of the Mobius strip, if everyone can see here, the concept was there, but the colors and the font were different. It was like almost like a neon pink gradient going to black, when I just felt like that's not right at all. And the font was like a Times New Roman font, which just didn't feel right for this book. So we went back with the feedback. My editor agreed with me that we should change those things. And so with the color scheme, we have in my living room, we have a print of a steampunk TARDIS, and my wife just pointed to that and she said, "What do you think about those colors?" And then I got pictures of Tara Sims, Time Breaker and Chain Breaker. So like those very metallic covers, I sent them over to my editor, and she passed that to the art team, and this was basically the second draft, and we were all thrilled with it. Like as soon as I got it, I said like, that's it, we're good. So I feel very, very fortunate. I don't think my second cover will be as good as this, just because this cover is perfect.
Nice.
It is a really good cover. So I I was familiar enough with publishing to know that your editor wants you to be happy with your cover. Like they don't just give you the one cover and they're like, this is it, you have to take it. And so I thought I would get maybe one redo if I didn't like it. We had 5 complete redos.
Wow.
Yeah, it got so late that they were like, okay, but we're gonna miss the pub date. And I think so. I love the cover that we ended. I love it so much. I think it's perfect for the book. But I think maybe that was so far that's been the only kind of interesting struggle I've had being at a publisher that's like between literary and genre, because the first 4 redesigns, they were trying really hard, I think, to make it look appealing to a genre audience, because I think they were afraid that was the audience we were going to get less of. But because they're kind of a literary publisher, they are very not good at genre covers. They have tons of beautiful covers, but just not, And so we went through 5 complete redesigns, and I am very grateful that they let us do that, because we ended up with something beautiful.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I was shown 2 designs for Trail, and my editor was like, which one do you like, A or B? And I was like, I think I really like A. And he's like, we're going to go with B. I was like, okay. And then we went through her face probably 5 times. My only rule was no feathers, no braids. I didn't want it to have this, sort of native look. I wanted it to be more rock and roll. And so the artist did one face, and I was like, she looks like Gina from Jersey. Why is she on top of that truck? And so we changed that, and then we did another face. And so we went through what did I say, 4 or 5 faces before we finally landed on the face that I thought looked Navajo. So yeah, that was cool. Thank you. Yeah, and we went, very movie postery for both the covers. So I'm really happy. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so maybe time for one more question? Yeah. Sure.
Actually, so one of the really nice things about the second book, even though it is 100 times more stressful, is that right now I'm at that halfway point. I have about 60,000 words because I just can't write short, so that's the first half, even though. But I just sent it a couple weeks ago to my editor and my agent, because I, now that I have an editor and agent, I can be like, I think I'm stuck, or what do you think of this, or is it going the right direction? And that is really nice, because the first one, you really do. I mean, I did at least write it completely alone. I really didn't show. I showed 3 other writer friends when I was done with it, and that was it. So I just struggled through the whole thing alone. But actually, I think I just spent a lot of time polishing it. So the first one I didn't do that many edits on with my editor. She bought it, and then we did 2 kind of quick rounds, and that was it. But yeah, it's very nice to be able to send her something now before I veer too far off track. So.
Yeah, I would say my editor was not afraid to give me tough love. More on this book 2. This one, because we were on submission for so long, I actually did several revised and resubmits for different editors before it ultimately died at acquisitions. But that meant that when it was bought, it was actually pretty clean, and we only did a minor revision on that. But when we did do the minor revision, my editor had come up with things she had me take out an entire subplot, and at first I was like, "Oh, that hurts." But then she gave her reasoning, and I thought about it. I'm like, "You're right. This makes it much leaner and tighter, and we should do this." And so I think with this process, my agent is pretty editorial, but my editors have been much more in depth. And I think the biggest turning point for me is being much more open to giving myself 24 hours to mourn after they suggest something that really, really hurts, and then just being okay, they're probably right. Let's take a look at this. And like dropping that defensiveness was probably like the biggest thing for me.
Yeah, and I think mine was, my editor would put questions in the margins, like, what's this? Why is this? And at first I was like, oh, well, let me answer that question in the margins. And I was like, oh, no, he means in the text. Like, the text doesn't make sense. And so, let me, so that sort of thing. But I love having an editor. It's great. And I don't, the people that push back and are like, don't mess with my work, I'm like, no, please tell me what's working, what's not working, get another pair of eyes on this, because when you're writing, you're so in your head and in your own world that sometimes you just can't see it. And if some person, catches it and they're like, this doesn't make sense, they're probably right. There's going to be someone else that doesn't think it makes sense either. So, and I think we're supposed to be done. You see, you have 5 minutes to get to the next thing, so I think we're done. Yay!
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.